welcome to the future of healing. We had some debate internally what to call it, whether the future of healing or meet the scientists of Helfgott, and we kind of settled in somewhere in the middle there. And the goal here is really to show you the type of work that's going on in Helfgott and the type of research that's going on there. In this case, particularly around research around the brain. So if you're not familiar, the Helfgott Research Institute is the research institute, the research department of the National University of Natural Medicine. We are a professionally independent nonprofit research organization. So we have folks from all over, from conventional biomedicine, organic chemists, naturopathic medicine, traditional Chinese medicine, nutrition, immunology, acupuncture, you name it, which is just really this incredible community of folks from all walks of life, but that share a passion for research in complementary and integrative health. That's what really sets us apart. And if you'd like to learn more about NUNM and Helfgott, the research department, there's a link here as well. So just nunm.edu/research. And again, the purpose that we're pursuing here is to say, well, there's this amazing community at the Helfgott Research Institute, and we're doing some incredible research, and we want to highlight it. We want the larger community to see what we're up to see some of the emerging research in the complementary and integrative health space, and to learn from it, and to ask questions, and to participate, and to be a part of this larger community. And that's part of a initiative that we're working on here to just de-siloanize, to go beyond the walls of the institution and out into the larger community. And so that's our goal here. I'm Dr. Joshua Goldenberg. I am the director of the Helfgott Research Institute. I do some brain research myself, but the four speakers today are really focused on that and are going to be sharing some of their incredible work today with you. So we're going to go kind of rapid fire through about 20-25 minute presentations, some time for questions. And at the end of the 2 hours, we will rotate through some really fascinating new research and emerging research in this space. So Dr. Hicks will get us started talking about research in psychedelics and the brain. Dr. Zimmerman will be talking about aging and the brain and some of his incredible research in that space. Dr. Wingate on rewiring the injured brain. So there's another focus here at Helfgott on the traumatic brain injury and brain injury and how to recover and brain healing. And then likewise, Dr. Sodders will be talking about acupuncture and after traumatic brain injury as well. So let's take it from there. I'm going to stop sharing and without further ado, pass the baton over to Matthew, Dr. Hicks, who will be starting us off today. Dr. Hicks, take it away.
All right, are you all seeing my screen?
Yes, coming through.
Excellent, great. Okay, so a little bit on me. I'm a naturopathic doctor. I also completed a master's degree in medical research, and as well as lots of training in psychedelic therapies. The LPF there in my after my name means licensed psilocybin facilitator, which is also some work I do here in Oregon's regulated psilocybin program. And I'll tell you a little bit at the end about my study. But first, we're going to talk a little bit about the neuropharmacology. Since we're focusing on the brain, we can talk about how do psychedelics work on the brain, where some of those benefits come from. And I'll focus on psilocybin, but I'll at least mention a few tidbits about other psychedelics, as well as cover some of the legal status and accessibility issues around psychedelics, which was the inspiration for my study, which was how to make them more accessible to more people, especially low income. So I did a study here in Oregon using the Oregon Psilocybin Services model, where we had low income adults with depression, and we provided them psilocybin therapy in a group model. And I'll get to those results there toward the end. Now, there are lots of psychedelics out there, probably, gosh, I don't even know how many, hundreds, if you count all the molecule type substances out there, as well as tons and tons of plant medicines, but the most common ones are the ones you see here on the list. Psilocybin is sort of leading the way right now in terms of being really close to an approved treatment, as well as MDMA. But you've probably heard of LSD, maybe you've heard of ayahuasca. There's DMT and 5-MeO DMT. There's mescaline-containing plants like peyote and wachuma, and ketamine therapy, which is an anesthetic, but that also has psychedelic effects and can be used as a psychedelic therapy, which is something else I do in my private practice. But like I said, we're going to keep it simple today and just talk mostly about psilocybin. But you can categorize most of these things into one of three categories. One just being a catch-all sort of other category, like ketamine, for example, is not in this list. But almost all the other psychedelics can be either considered a tryptamine or a phenethylamine, and those are what the molecules look like. So just in case you like pictures of molecules. But how do they actually work in the brain? Now, here there's a divergence of opinion. In one camp, people will say it's the psychedelic experience itself that has the profound healing effect that we see, the treatment of depression and trauma, and people who undergo these treatments come through them often, not always, but often with these really profound stories where they go on these like long journeys and see visions and have these mystical experiences. And some evidence shows that the more mystical an experience is, the more it correlates with the benefits people receive. And so that's one camp. On the other camp is a more pharmacology oriented camp that says, no, this is just neuroplasticity. And as a result, there are people in the pharmacology industry who are trying to develop what they're calling psychoplastogens, which are basically psychedelics without the psychedelic experience. There's no hallucinations, there's no mystical experience. They just do what I'm about to describe here. Regardless of who's right or wrong, all psychedelics basically have this mechanism, which is related to neuroplasticity. So we all produce a protein in our brain called brain-derived neurotrophic factor. It's sometimes called miracle grow for your brain. It basically prevents your brain cells, your neurons from the dying process, and also promotes their growth and their development. They're kind of branching out and forming connections with other brain cells. So it does good stuff for you. What we have found is that psychedelics do two things. One is they upregulate the production of BDNF, but they also directly act on the receptor for BDNF, which is called TRKB. And so it has a really strong, immediate, but short-lived effect on BDNF and TRKB. And so the other things that promote these they're well known and well established are things like exercise and diet. So you're definitely not dependent on psychedelics. It is not the only way to increase your brain health. But some of those things are a little bit weaker and slower and require kind of disciplined behavior change to get those benefits. Whereas, one full dose of a psychedelic is a pretty profound, deep dose of BDNF, causing your brain cells to form more connections and stronger connections. And so that is what some believe is the strongest effect from psychedelics, regardless of the experience. Now, let's talk a little bit more about the experience itself and why do psychedelics induce these mystical experiences, right? So they seem to have an effect. And different psychedelics impact different brain receptors. The most notable one that's most common across all psychedelics is the serotonin 2A receptor. And where you have a high density of that receptor is on some distinct regions that form a network in your brain called a default mode network. And the default mode network is involved in your sense of self, your ego, if you will. It also is sort of always running in the background. and can become, when it's overactive, we see that people with obsessive compulsive disorder, with deep depression, and other mental illnesses, their brain or their default mode network is kind of hooked on overdrive. They're experiencing ruminating thoughts. They're maybe judging themselves a lot. They feel like, in the case of OCD, they're really compelled to think in these like looping patterns, right? And so what psychedelics do temporarily during the peak of their effects is they quiet down this region of your brain. And so what that does, and that's what this MRI image here is showing you. These are the regions of the default mode network that are basically quieting down that region of your brain. And what that does is basically loosens that sense of self. It loosens that self-awareness and allows different regions of your brain to interact. And that's why people come through these experiences often describing unitive experiences, feeling one with the universe, or things like that. So it's sort of a softening. And so that has led Robin Carhart Harris, who's the leader in this space, to develop the Rebus model, which I'll describe. That's actually the next slide. I'm getting ahead of myself. But I want to show you this because this is a diagram, and I think it's called the homological scaffolding diagram or something like that. But basically, each of these little bubbles around the periphery represent a different, distinct region of the brain, right? And so each of these distinct regions talk to other regions of your brain, and that's how they form networks and they interact. Maybe one of these could be like you smell something and it reminds you of grandma baking cookies. And so that forms a little connection, like the memory and the sense of smell, right? And so on the left here, you have a normal functioning brain who has taken a placebo, and on the right you have someone on psilocybin. And this is their network scaffolding, meaning there's not more activity in the brain, as I'll describe in a minute, but there's more interconnectivity of different regions in the brain. So it's literally like you're forming connections across brain regions that don't normally talk, or at least not nearly as much to each other. So it's sort of a reshuffling of your normal brain patterns, which can really help people get out of stuck rigid forms of thinking, which is what the Rebus model is about. It's called relaxed beliefs under psychedelics. And so the sciencey jargon way to say it is that it synthesizes this entropic brain theory and the hierarchical predictive coding, right? Our brain naturally wants to predict certain outcomes, and that's how it helps us survive, right? But when those predictions become almost oppressive to our well-being or non-functional, then we have a problem. And so psychedelics relax these high-level priors, as we say. There's these beliefs which are happening in the cortex, liberating bottom-up or limbic information flow. So how do you say that as a normal human being? Psychedelics disrupt rigid thought patterns, helping you access buried emotions and experience a wider range of feelings. And by the way, if you have questions forming while I talk, you can drop them into the chat. And I've made sure to time myself so that there's time at the end for some discussion. So feel free to drop them in the chat or bring them up at the end. But a common misconception, partly because you see these really colorful images of brain imaging studies, is people think that psychedelics create more brain energy, brain activity. It's actually the opposite. And you can see in this diagram, it's a little confusing. You see all this blue and you think more activity, but if you look at the legend on the right here, blue is actually the placebo state, meaning that there's less activity here. And at the bottom, you can see that in this case, it was an LSD study. The overall energy power is less in the LSD state versus the placebo. So just a little food for thought there. I find this really interesting when you compare it to, for example, near-death experiences where people have are temporarily dead, their brain activity flatlines, but they get resuscitated and they have these incredible visions and all sorts of experiences that don't necessarily make sense from a scientific standpoint. There's a lot of debate about that, but they often have this overlap with kind of psychedelic experiences where it's very vivid imagery and sort of mystical, often experiences that people report. Uh, and so there's a parallel there where psychedelics, by reducing brain activity, almost create more vivid experiences. So anyway, I could go into that and talk more. I think it's really fascinating, but I just wanted to point that out a little bit. So to say a few things about psilocybin is that there's over 200 species across the world that contain psilocybin containing mushrooms. The highest concentration of them is in Central America and the Caribbean here. And so what we have ended up with is psilocybe cubensis that comes from Cuba for whatever reason is the one that got spread around, that it's very easy to grow. And so that's what is commonly people are cultivating at home and using. And it is under the Oregon law, the only species of mushrooms that can be used here in Oregon in that program. But these mushrooms contain several compounds, but the most important one is psilocybin, which in the body gets transformed into another compound called psilocin, and that is what interacts with the serotonin receptors to cause all the effects that I just talked about. So from there, let's just talk a moment about how people can access psychedelic therapies and sort of what is the status of them. As I mentioned earlier, ketamine was approved in the 60s as an anesthetic drug, and it was known then that it had psychedelic effects, but it wasn't approved for mental health treatments. But it remains an off-label use that many practitioners, including myself, can offer legally with an appropriate license and scope of practice to do psychedelic therapies. So that's one option. But everything else, all the other psychedelic substances that I listed earlier, are considered Schedule 1 according to the Controlled Substance Act, and that means, according to the Drug Enforcement Agency, that they have no medical benefit and a high degree of risk. Despite lots of evidence to the contrary, that's where they remain. However, there is a lot of effort currently underway to change this, both at state levels as well as federal levels. And it's one of those issues that surprises some people, but it's actually a bipartisan issue. You have both Republicans and Democrats in favor of moving psychedelic therapies forward and more research, including the current administration and the Secretary of Health are pro psychedelic. So we think that we're going to see more progress. It just, moves at the pace of government work in that regard. So it may not be fast, but it is moving in a positive direction. Well, the other thing I want to mention just briefly is that back in 1993, long story short, a Native American man lost his federal job because he participated in a peyote ceremony in the Native American church. And this actually, surprisingly, Christians came to his defense and saying this is an infringement of religious freedom. And so they passed a bill signed by then President Clinton outlining more criteria about what the First Amendment religious freedom rights entailed. And it includes a shift of putting the burden of proof on the government to prove that a religious or spiritual practice, like including the consumption of a psychedelic, like in this case, peyote, was a significant risk that compelled the state to intervene in it. And so it's created a little bit of a gray area, but we're seeing more and more churches being formed and calling psychedelic plants their sacrament. and are therefore using it in their practices. And, so a lot of things to consider there, including what are the qualifications and specialties of the people who are leading these churches. They don't regulate practitioners. They might have training, they might not have training in sort of the medical aspects. So there's some caution warranted there in terms of what's safe and what's spiritual practice versus treatment. If you're there and you ought to really be under the care of a professional to treat your trauma or your depression, going to a church may not be the best place for you, but it is a sort of way that people are navigating psychedelic use in a legal way. So I just wanted to mention that. But Oregon. So in Oregon in 2020, we passed this law, which took full effect in 23, that creates Oregon psilocybin services. It does not allow for recreational sales. What you have to do is go to a licensed service center, which is like a clinic essentially, where you can there purchase mushrooms from a licensed grower. It's the only place you can buy them, and it has to be consumed on site under the supervision of a licensed facilitator who has been trained in a licensed training program. So there's lots of layers of rules and licensure. And that's all really wonderful that we have created that, and it's a very safe program that has had lots of successes, but it's also very expensive. These licenses, the facilitator license fee, for example, is more than 4 times more expensive than my physician's license, where I could actually hurt people much worse. It ends up being cheaper if I were to make a mistake or something. But anyway, all of these costs ultimately result in in a trickle down sort of way being a burden on consumers. And so while the mushrooms themselves are actually pretty cheap, the person's time, the facilitator's time is what ends up making these really expensive. Not, and of course, all of the regulations that have to be followed. And there's, of course, no insurance coverage. And it ends up being a burden on people who really would otherwise potentially benefit. So I wanted to do something about this, and I developed a protocol which I called the Low Income Group Psilocybin Assisted Therapy for Depression Study, or LIGPAT for short. And so we took Medicaid eligible folks who had at least 6 months of stable housing and were engaged in psychotherapy. We wanted to make sure, especially when working with a low income population, that we were helping people that could potentially benefit. We weren't taking someone in a kind of an unstable situation and maybe making things worse. And of course, we had some exclusions to make sure it was medically safe for everybody. And we ended up with 19 people completed the study. So pretty good return rate. This was a feasibility study, meaning we weren't necessarily here to prove that this treatment works. We were here to prove that the study could be done, that it could potentially benefit. And so we did that, and that part of it worked out pretty well. Here's some of the demographics of the folks who were in the study. And here are some of the results. We had no severe adverse reactions. We had some of the normal adverse reactions that you expect with psychedelic therapies, which includes a few people vomiting, some people having some nausea and headaches and dysphoria. But people rated that they were very satisfied with the intervention. They gave it a 4.8 on average out of 5. So that was really encouraging. And then here are their depression scores. So in the blue is each individual's depression score asked at 4 different time points, and the red line just represents the mean or the average of the whole group. So we had some outliers. A few people kind of got better and then got worse again at the 3-month follow-up period. But on average, most people had a really profound net benefit from the intervention overall. Then we also collected something called the Promise 29. It has these 7 subscales uh, related to different health factors, including physical function, cognitive function, and ability to participate in social activities and roles. And everyone had a significant benefit in those factors of their lives, as well as decreased fatigue, sleep disturbance, anxiety, and even some pain interference. Everyone improved across all of these factors. Pain interference was the weakest improvement and didn't last as long as some of the others did. But nonetheless, at least, some short-term benefit in regard to pain. So in conclusion, this study demonstrated that a low-income population with depression doing a group psilocybin therapy intervention was safe, well tolerated, and acceptable, and gave us at least early indications that it could be effective, warranting further investigation. So that is it for me. If we have, looks like I kind of used up all my time. But if we have time, I'll leave that up to you, Joshua, if there's time for questions. But you can feel free to email me with questions or have some more information about and some of my other research findings available at this website, which you can scan the QR code to take you there. But otherwise,
Outstanding.
I'll hand it back to you, Josh.
Thank you very much. That was a fascinating presentation, beautifully presented. Thank you. I do see some questions in the chat as well. I think for safety of time, let's pen questions for everybody to the end. But if you want to answer some of those questions that came in the chat, that would be great for everybody for their benefit. Thank you again, and let's turn the baton over to Dr. Zimmerman. And yes, there he is. Fantastic. Go ahead, Ben, whenever you're ready,
All
sir.
right. Yeah. Hopefully you're seeing my screen now.
Yes.
Can you? Yeah, cool. All right. Yeah, good morning. My name's Ben Zimmerman, and I'm a neuroscientist at the Helfgott Research Institute. And today I want to challenge some of the assumptions about brain aging that we might have and share with you a little bit about the science that I do toward the goal of preventing cognitive decline. So I want to take some time to sort of explain my rationale around this research and exploring why prevention is hard to prove and how that sort of shaped my research focus recently on botanicals and supplements. So I think that this sort of depicts the usual way of thinking about cognition in aging. We've all heard this story. As we get older, our thinking slows down, our memory fades. In the research literature, we call this normal, or sometimes it's even called healthy age-related cognitive decline. And that language is really to differentiate this pattern from other kinds of more severe pathology. But this has always irked me a little bit because, in my opinion, just because something is normal doesn't really mean that it's healthy and that we should ignore it as a problem. And we know that cognitive ability, like attention and memory and problem solving, these things change because the biology of the brain is changing. And I'm really interested in understanding those biological changes and then intervening on them so that sort of age-related cognitive decline hopefully becomes less normal. I wanted to start by showing you what some of this data looks like, where this idea of age-related cognitive decline comes from. So this is from a very large study called the Seattle Longitudinal Study that followed the cognition of people of many different ages for many years. And what they saw is that if you look at the cognitive ability of people at different ages, you see this pattern where actually certain abilities like numeric ability or verbal ability, they tend to stay stable or even increase a little bit into old age. Whereas there's these other abilities such as inductive reasoning, spatial orientation, perceptual speed, these abilities that are thought to be involved in fluidly solving novel problems, they seem to decrease across the lifespan. And you'll see this kind of plot a lot in like grants or just like on the internet because I think it's like a very scary picture. It's also not the whole story. So I wanted to show you that. If we look at the longitudinal data, so this is how the cognition of those individuals in the study are changing over time. We see a different picture that's actually a bit more optimistic. So if we look longitudinally, we see that most of these abilities actually tend to stay stable or even increase over the lifespan until the 60s or 70s, except for this domain of perceptual speed, which we still see linear decreases over the lifespan. But this is just to point out that in both ways of looking at this, we see that cognitive ability does seem to decline in old age. These declines in cognition map onto measurable changes in the brain. So this is the study I'm showing here. Adults are either diagnosed with mild cognitive impairment, I'll say MCI for short, or there's normal controls and they're followed over some years. And this study was interested in seeing if there were age-related brain changes that were really unique to people diagnosed with MCI. Mild cognitive impairment, in case you're unfamiliar with this, it sounds like mild, like nice, but that's actually a more severe form of cognitive decline than the normal age-related cognitive decline, and it often precedes dementia. So these thick lines show the group averages of the total gray matter of the brain and the volume here of the hippocampus in the brain using MRI. And then these faded lines that are sort of hovering around the thick lines show the individual participants in the study and how they changed over time. So these participants are followed longitudinally. And their takeaway, like the point of this study, the big lesson from the paper, was that while MCI and normal aging look pretty similar in the brain as a whole, there are certain areas where the trajectory of decline really looks different, like the hippocampus. And there are a lot of studies that look at and show this kind of thing. But for me, the thing that always really gets me going and that like really excites me is that there's always a few people who look like this. They're in their 70s or 80s, but their brain is growing or their cognition is improving and they're like getting way better at all the tests. And so this is always really exciting to me because it shows that aging isn't like one inevitable slope. It's the spectrum. And I'm curious if we can sort of discover the levers that we can pull to get more people onto this sort of trajectory. There's been a lot of debate about whether mild cognitive impairment and then Alzheimer's disease, whether those things are just the end stage of normal cognitive aging. And it doesn't seem to be. So for instance, like that last slide showed, there seems to be systematic differences in people who have normal cognitive decline and people who get diagnosed with a pathology like mild cognitive impairment. But I also think it's really important to point out that the biggest predictor of Alzheimer's disease and other dementias by far is aging. So that's really important. This plot is showing how steeply the risk of Alzheimer's disease rises with age. And this plot is just comparing it to other age-related diseases. So for all of these variables, aging is like the strongest risk factor of dying from any of these things. But notice this y-axis goes up in multiples of 10, not in multiples of 1. So this curve is really, really steep. Between ages 65 and 74, the prevalence of Alzheimer's disease is only about 5%. But if over the age of 85, you have about a 1 in 3 chance of having Alzheimer's disease. So the fact that age is such a strong predictor makes it likely that there's quite a bit of overlap in the biological processes that lead to normal age-related decline and that lead to Alzheimer's. And so even if a potential therapy doesn't target the unique pathology of Alzheimer's disease, I personally strongly believe that therapies that address age-related brain dysfunction will also help address Alzheimer's and these other dementias. Unfortunately, we've been amazingly unsuccessful so far at treating Alzheimer's disease, but really not at all for lack of trying. This is a plot that's just showing all the different compounds that have failed in clinical trials between 2004 and 2021. There are 2 FDA-approved disease-modifying treatments for Alzheimer's disease now, but even those have been really contentious because of their cost-to-benefit ratio and because of some risk that come along with them. And I really think part of the problem is timing. So one idea about why there have been so many failures is that once someone is like diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease or even mild cognitive impairment, they have pretty extensive brain damage going on already. It's likely that the pathological processes that eventually lead to dementia actually begin decades before any of these noticeable cognitive changes. So this is, I'm showing just an example of observational evidence of that. This paper analyzed a large data set from the Alzheimer's Disease Neuroimaging Initiative, and they quantified the level of biomarker abnormality for different stages of the disease. So they looked at healthy controls, and then they look at early mild cognitive impairment, late mild cognitive impairment, and then finally late onset Alzheimer's disease. And what they saw was some significant separation in biomarker abnormality, even between like healthy and early mild cognitive impairment, which becomes more profound by late stage and late onset Alzheimer's disease. And you can, this is just zooming in on that early stage. You can see here that this vascular biomarker was the earliest predictor of changes and eventual conversion to Alzheimer's. This is really interesting to me because vascular function begins to change much earlier in the lifespan than the age where something like cognitive dysfunction becomes apparent. So this is another way of just looking at trajectories of different biological and cognitive changes. We are diagnosed with mild cognitive impairment or dementia way over here when we start having these more severe noticeable cognitive symptoms. But before that, we have neurodegeneration, we have tau pathology. Before that, maybe some amyloid plaques, and before that, vascular impairment in the brain. So it's probably easiest to promote health over here earlier in time before you have this like accumulating damage. But unfortunately, it's also a lot more difficult to study. For one thing, the further you go back this way, the fewer people who have one of these biomarkers go on to develop dementia later on. So for example, only a very small proportion of people who have cerebrovascular impairment will go on to develop dementia. And more people with amyloid plaques will go on to develop dementia, but still not everyone. By the time you can sort of see the hallmarks of the neurodegeneration, you're pretty sure that it's going to be going to lead to dementia. And another problem is just this huge time gap. Running a multi-decade clinical trial to see if some intervention prevents dementia is far more difficult than running like a 6-month clinical trial to see if a drug modifies the disease process once it's already been diagnosed. Oops. When we talk about the primary prevention of chronic diseases, whether that's like Alzheimer's disease, cardiovascular disease, diabetes, the challenge really isn't just scientific. There's definitely a scientific challenge there, but it's also related to challenges in risks to pharma and also challenges around regulation. So I'm just showing here the FDA's framework for approving drugs, and it's really designed for diseases where you can see meaningful changes over a relatively short period of time. For prevention, especially in conditions that take decades to develop, you run into this fundamental barrier that you need very, very long, very expensive trials that are very large to prove that a drug actually prevents disease onset. And that means that most promising compounds for primary prevention for these chronic diseases probably never even get tested in this traditional drug pathway. We don't really have a great way of developing preventative therapeutic targets. Like for a drug to be approved, the FDA requires a really rigorous clinical trial. And that's a really good thing. I'm not saying that we shouldn't do that. But it makes it very difficult to treat diseases that develop over long periods of time. And I think there's a really big gap in this whole class of potential like pharmaceuticals that probably do exist in theory that could really help with preventing or postponing many of these longer term diseases, but there's not really like an incentive framework to discover them. On the other hand, botanicals and supplements are regulated in a really different way, even though they can still contain like potent bioactive compounds. These are really interesting to me in the context of prevention. And prevention really interests me because I think that's the path forward to really helping with our problem with age-related dementias and Alzheimer's disease, because I can study the biological effects on how these things modify physiology in a way that looks like it may prevent disease from observational studies. So like I can link it to something that we know is associated with the development of Alzheimer's disease, like say blood pressure or something like that. So for me, this is an opportunity. We can rigorously study interventions. These things are already used by the public. They might carry lower risk than a lot of pharmaceutical drugs, and they can be deployed really quickly if they are proved to be effective. So in collaboration with the Benfra Botanical Center at OHSU, I've been studying recently the effects of a botanical herb called Centella asiatica, or gotu kola, on cerebrovascular health. This is a study done in mice, both young and old mice. So this is a really small part of a huge multi-lab effort with many experiments, but I just wanted to give you like a taste of it and a taste of what I'm doing. So I treat mice with a gotu kola extract in their water for 5 weeks. And then I look at how reactive the blood vessels in their brain are. What we do is called a hypercapnia challenge, where I have the mice breathe air with 5% CO2. And this causes the vessels of the brain to dilate. And just how much they dilate is based on how healthy their vessels are. So this is just showing an anatomical image of a mouse brain taken using MRI. And this is showing a map of blood flow in the mouse's brain in the same slice. And what I found is that the mice treated with the gotu kola have higher cerebrovascular reactivity than control mice who were not treated. So this y-axis here is just showing the percent change in cerebral blood flow after the mice breathe that 5% CO2 enriched air. We see that both young and old mice treated with gotu kola showed improved cerebrovascular reactivity. And this seems to be even enhanced in the older mice, although there's not a significant interaction effect here. So that's really promising to me and really interesting. I'm taken this research further, and I'm also conducting a human trial right now, which is ongoing at the Helfgott Research Institute, looking at if taking a gotu kola supplement has any effect on the health of the peripheral blood vessels. And eventually I'd like to connect those things. I want to study the link between the peripheral blood vessel health and the vessels of the brain. So if you're interested, this is ongoing. I don't have data to present here, but if you're interested in learning more about the study or even maybe participating yourself, feel free to email this address. And you can also see all of the ongoing research studies at the Helfgott Research Institute at this address if you're interested in participating. So with that, I just wanted to acknowledge that like the research I do is definitely not in a vacuum. There have been a lot of people and a lot of funding involved in the work that I do. And this is just showing what that gotu kola herb looks like. So with that, I'll stop and take some questions.
Wonderful. Dr. Zimmerman, Ben, that was outstanding presentation. Really, really interesting work. Let's hand the questions for everybody to the end. It looks like we're recouping some time, so appreciate that. And that way we can sort of roundtable these questions. If people have questions directly for Ben, put them in the chat. And Ben can try to answer to everybody during the next presentation. And that way everyone can kind of learn. And then any areas that people want to explore further, we can do at the tail end. So thank you for that. Outstanding. Let's go ahead and pivot to Dr. Wingate. You're up next, sir.
Fantastic. Thank you. Are you able to hear me okay?
Yes, loud and clear.
Okay, great. I'm going to go ahead and switch over and share my screen then. All right. And are we able to see the presentation okay?
Yes, we are.
Excellent. So my name is Dr. Doug Wingate. My doctorate is in traditional Chinese medicine. My postdoc is in clinical neuroscience, and I've been a clinician for the last 15 years or so. Most of my clinical practice is really focused in on neurotrauma recovery, so concussion care, traumatic brain injury, stroke recovery. And so I'm coming from that background. I am also a functional medicine hyperbaric clinician. So we integrate hyperbaric medicine into some of the protocols and some of the rehabilitation process, as well as like Dr. Hicks. I'm a licensed psilocybin facilitator. So another area of research interest of mine is the uh, potential in psychedelic assisted neurorehabilitation, which I'll tie into this for just a brief moment after we get into this. But today I'm going to be talking about something, a relatively new intervention that we're taking a look at, and I'm pretty excited about in the traumatic brain injury post-concussion realm. So we're going to take a look at rewiring the injured brain and the potential of next generation neurofeedback and the future of brain healing. So before we kind of talk about the study and what the intervention is and the protocol and what we're taking a look at, just a little bit of background on traumatic brain injury. Like I said, it's been a specialty, a clinical focus of mine since I've been in practice for the last 15 years. And part of the reason for that is it is a vastly under-recognized condition where it is one of the leading causes of disability around the world. There are millions of individuals, or over 1 million individuals, that have a traumatic brain injury or some sort of concussion. Concussion is considered a mild traumatic brain injury. And I guess the term mild, when it relates to traumatic brain injury, only has to do with the severity at the time of injury and absolutely has nothing to do with long-term disability or symptomology. So people will sometimes have what's considered a mild traumatic brain injury or concussion, and can sometimes have lifelong symptoms that they're dealing with after having this injury. So, and they can be at times severe or debilitating. So the term mild is a little bit of a misnomer there. It only refers to how severe the symptoms were at the time of injury. But so this is a big issue that's impacting a lot of people over the last couple of decades. Fortunately, there's been more conversation around traumatic brain injury, especially in relationship to sports injuries. So chronic or repetitive concussions that happen as a result of being in sports, impact sports, and then with veterans and those who have been deployed and coming back with blast injuries and things like that, various concussions that happen. Unfortunately, that these are things are happening, but it has increased the awareness around the prevalence of traumatic brain injury. And so this is an arena that I'm really, really passionate about. And my clinical practice at this point, anywhere from 85 to 95% of the people that I'm treating usually have some sort of past history of concussion or traumatic brain injury. So some of the common symptoms that people may experience after a concussion or traumatic brain injury is cognitive fog or brain fog, mood dysregulations. So it may have heightened emotions or just not being able to regulate their emotions nearly as well. Fatigue is a very common one. Headaches is a very common one. There's a whole host of other symptoms that people can experience. Often these are kind of at the forefront for people. And so often when I have somebody come in and we're sitting down and talking about, what is their primary concern? What is the primary symptom? These are very commonly among them, if not all present, and looking to see what we can do about all of these symptoms. And then a lot of this has to do with a degree of chronic neuroinflammation that's happening, so inflammation in the nervous system, and that the brain is very energy expensive. It takes a lot of energy in order for the brain just to do what it does on a daily basis. And so if there's been a history of trauma to the brain tissue itself, it's even more energy expensive because it's not only trying to do normal daily operations, but also heal the tissue at the same time. And so this can lead to even greater fatigue. And part of the reason that you can get some of this brain fog is because so much energy is being allocated to this healing process. So what we find, unfortunately, in the realm of traumatic brain injury and concussion care is that there's a gap in the recovery process. So biomedical approaches for TBI and concussion really focus on acute stabilization. So if somebody has a brain injury, has a brain trauma, the goal in the hospital is to get them medically stable, get them to a point where they are able to operate on their own and don't no longer have to be hospitalized if they did have to be hospitalized in the first place. And following that, they may have recommendations for occupational therapy or physical therapy and various interventions that may be helpful in the post-acute phase. But there really seems to be overall a gap in what to do after the acute medical stabilization. So that's been a lot of my clinical focus, utilizing a number of different interventions, everything from, like I said, my background is in traditional Chinese medicine. So acupuncture, my focus with that is with acupuncture as a means of non-invasive brain stimulation and understanding and researching how acupuncture can stimulate different neural networks through scalp acupuncture. I utilize photobiomodulation, which is the use of lasers as a means of non-invasive brain stimulation. So medical lasers are able to penetrate the scalp to the degree that it's not causing any sort of tissue damage, but it's stimulating areas of the brain. It's not too dissimilar from other approaches like TMS, transcranial magnetic stimulation, and transcranial electrical stimulation. TMS is not one that I personally utilize. A lot of the people that I'm working with have had pretty significant neurotrauma, and TMS is sometimes a little bit too stimulating, and it can actually run the risk of exacerbating symptoms. So that while I'll sometimes refer out for that when it's appropriate, that's not something that I personally utilize in my practice. Something else that we are now exploring in addition to this, is going to be, we'll talk about in a few slides, is going to be a means of passive neurofeedback. But first, we'll talk a little bit about brain coherence and what that means and its implications on health. So what happens frequently after a concussion or after a traumatic brain injury is that the brain becomes or can become incoherent. So sustained coherence in low frequencies of the brain increases relaxation and focuses mental attention. And when the brain is thrown out of coherence, so we have the brain has electrical signals that it operates through, and then we also have different waveforms that the brain operates at. You may have heard of things like alpha states or alpha waves, beta waves, theta waves, delta waves, and gamma waves, all of which the brain uses in order to function. And when these become out of sync or out of coherence, it causes dysregulation in the nervous system. And so can also either contribute to or exacerbate or make it so that those symptoms are sticking around and not being relieved. So one of the goals of intervention is to bring the nervous system back into coherence so that it can increase this relaxation. Many people can be sort of locked into the fight or flight response. The sympathetic activation is a very common thing. And that plays into this. So by bringing the nervous system back into coherence, we're able to sort of break that cycle, bring somebody out of that fight or flight response, which in itself can sometimes be very helpful because that's also very energy draining on the nervous system and very activating and can be emotionally dysregulating. So with the goal of bringing the brain back into coherence, it helps eliminate noise in the brainwave data, and we'll see some of the brainwave data in the next slide. It creates a balance in the body's chemistry. It also allows for a decrease in heart rate, in blood pressure, and shortness of breath, which can be common symptoms when you are locked into or stuck in that fight or flight response. So bringing somebody out of that helps regulate the autonomic nervous system. Dysautonomia is a term for dysregulation of the autonomic nervous system, includes that fight or flight response or the sympathetic nervous system. I work with a lot of people who have dysautonomia symptoms as well, and that comes into play here also. But by bringing the nervous system back into coherence, it allows for a re-regulation of that autonomic nervous system. It allows for an evening of respiration, so breathing patterns become much more regular, allowing for deep breathing, and increases in gastrointestinal activity is also a response. So a lot of people, if they are sort of chronically locked in a fight or flight response, and we're able to break that cycle, as it were, or bring them out of that fight or flight response, or allow their body to shift into more of a parasympathetic state, which is your rest and digest sort of phase or mode that your body goes into, we'll often be able to hear changes in gastrointestinal activity. So we'll hear stomach gurgles and things like that, and it's often a good indicator that we've down-regulated the nervous system and brought the nervous system and the brain into a little better coherence. So this chart down here, I'm going to hide this, shows some of the different wavelengths and sort of their associations. So brain coherence can act as a biomarker for network dysregulation. So there are various brain networks or different areas of the brain that tend to communicate with one another. And as I said, a lot of my work with acupuncture research is taking a look at how non-invasive brain stimulation methods can be used in a network type approach, so we can influence these networks as a whole by understanding how things are interconnected. So that's based off of research in a school of study called connectnomics, and so we're able to utilize that and also understand that by generally shifting and improving brain coherence, it can act as a biomarker for dysregulation or re-regulation of particular brain networks that may be coming into play or might be involved in the symptoms that people are having. So approaches to brain coherence can act as a non-pharmacological tool for neural regulation. And as I said, we've got different waveforms or different frequencies at which our brain operates. Different areas of the brain can work at different frequencies depending on the amount of work that they're doing and the type of activity that they're doing. So we have our delta waves that are associated with more dreamless sleep or access to the subconscious, loss of bodily awareness. Thetas are a little higher frequency and are associated with feelings of inner peace, and our REM cycle of sleep, rapid eye movement sleep, and deep meditative states. Whereas alpha waves, again, we're going up in the degree of frequency here. So alpha waves are associated with more creativity, and we're considered flow states, as well as areas or states of acute focus. So when you're really focused in on something, your alpha waves are more prevalent and more at the forefront. Beta waves are associated with more focused concentration, elements of arousal when your nervous system is aroused, and alertness. So what we'll find, we'll see with the neurogen unit that we're using, we're able to see each one of these in real time. So we're taking a reading and we're able to see each one of these frequencies and how active they are. And often what we'll see with dysregulation, with a highly dysregulated nervous system, is that the high beta frequencies tend to be quite dysregulated. And so a lot of the focus becomes re-regulating those beta states. Or well, it can vary, but sometimes delta is off quite a bit too. But when there's high arousal and high states of alertness, or somebody's locked in that fight or flight response, the high betas tend to be more dysregulated, and we're able to see that in real time. And the gamma states are even higher frequencies and are associated with multiprocessing or multitasking. So some of the research that I'm involved in and that we're going to talk about today is taking a look at what's been referred to as next generation neurofeedback, or it's also been referred to as neurobiomodulation. So if you break that long term down, it's the ability to modulate or create change. So it's a system that creates change in both the nervous system and the biology or the body as a whole. So this next generation neurofeedback, it's a device called Neurogen Brain Balancing. The way that it works is it uses EEG guided coherence based feedback. So it's we take these nodes and they're placed over different areas of the scalp. Each one of those, it's attached to a wire that feeds into the neurogen system itself, takes a reading. So it takes an EEG reading. The EEG tells us basically how much electricity or how much power is running through each area of the brain. We're able to look at different patterns, and you can see if somebody has this on, if they start talking or moving around a lot, or they become activated or are highly aroused for whatever reason, then you'll see these spikes in the EEG. So we're able to see all of that in real time, as well as seeing real-time readings of these different waveform frequencies. So the way that this is laid out is it's usually either 5 or 9 wires. 3 of them do not move, so they act as our ground and our base negative wires, and then the rest of them are moved around to different areas of the scalp where it takes readings, and then takes that reading, determines the software determines areas or how much incoherence there is. It determines the mean or the average frequency that's happening, and then offsets that frequency and sends a very mild electrical current, a specific frequency, back to passively bring that area of the brain back into coherence. And so that's something that you're able to see in real time, and it's modulating, or it's changing in real time in response to where the brain is. So one of the benefits of this is that it's a passive form of neurofeedback. So many neurofeedback approaches are very active. You have an EEG reading, and then you usually have the person sitting down in front of a screen and responding to different stimuli. So it can be gamified to where they're reacting in a certain way, and the goal is to actively change the EEG reading in response to what you would be looking for. So greater brain coherence or better regulation of the nervous system. This system does it in a passive way. So there's no screens that the person needs to engage in. There's a screen where I'm taking a look at the readings, but I found this as a nice option for people with history of traumatic brain injury or concussion, where screens and lights and sensory input can be overstimulating or overly demanding. And so somebody can go through a standard neurofeedback session and feel pretty fatigued afterward, because they're having to do a fair amount of work, and it's very demanding on their brain, which is already compromised and already using up a lot of energy. So we're taking a look at this passive form and seeing how people respond to that. Through this, the brain is gently guided toward a state of self-regulation or coherence. So we are starting from a baseline of a study that was released earlier this year, taking a look at the application of Neurogen Brain Balancing System for veterans with PTSD. And the study took 80 veterans over 4 weekly sessions. So the people were coming in once a week for 4 sessions. Of this, the 80 veterans, 80% reported improvements in their conditions overall. 59% reported reduction in symptoms of photophobia. This is light sensitivity, also a very common symptom after a concussion or brain injury. 73% reported improvement in post-concussion symptoms. 37% reported decrease in headache severity, and there were indications, or the study concluded that there were indicated potentials for neural network healing. So we are taking this very promising preliminary statistic of 73% improvement in post-concussive symptoms and seeing if we can build upon that. So where we are doing a pilot study with taking a look at the feasibility and safety of application of this next generation neurofeedback system directly for TBI, individuals who have sustained a TBI. So rather than the inclusion being PTSD and PTSD, TBI, common comorbidities, many people, those sort of things overlap, or people experience symptoms of both. We're doing this pilot study to really focus on the TBI component. So the objective of the study is as a feasibility study, so seeing if the study can be done, taking a look at the safety of doing the study. So the system's been used, and we have anecdotal evidence of thousands of individuals, many who have a history of TBI. And we're really looking to solidly look at the feasibility of consistently doing this and the tolerance of utilizing the system for people who have traumatic brain injury or history of concussion, and then taking a look at the neural effects in chronic mild to moderate TBI symptomology. So the design is 10 participants. We're going to do 5 sessions over the period of 2 to 3 weeks. So they'll be coming in rather than the once a week. With the PTSD study, they'll be coming in once to twice a week. And then we're going to take a look at, as far as the measures that we're using, we're going to monitor EEG coherence. We're going to look at functional near-infrared spectrography or FNIRS, to take a look at blood flow through several areas of the brain. So the EEG will allow us to see general coherence patterns and the coherence of electricity that's flowing through areas of the brain. And the FNIRS will allow us to take a look at functional blood flow. So see if there are improvements or changes in blood flow and what those may be in response to this form of passive neurofeedback. And then we're utilizing symptom questionnaires as well. So taking pre and post questionnaires of the symptoms people are having and seeing if there's any change, improvements, or worsening of symptoms over time. So the assessment measures in the study is using the NeuroGen EEG coherence metrics that are done during the session. We're able to take that data, that raw data, and analyze that. And then we're using the Muse SEEG. It's a wearable device in order to take EEG readings and that FNIRS reading to get the functional near-infrared spectrometry, and the symptom scale assessments in order to determine the safety and tolerability of this type of study and this type of application for traumatic brain injury. So really, we're looking at gauging viability and safety of how appropriate this is as an intervention, and how appropriate it may be to build out into a larger scale study and larger general applications, or I guess applications in a general population. So as far as symptoms tracking, we're going to take a look and ask pre-post as far as symptoms like headache and dizziness and fatigue, and a lot of the common symptoms that we talked about, including cognition and emotional regulation. We'll be doing regular neurological examinations and allowing for self-report assessments, and then the objective measures of the EEG and the functional neuroimaging. So we are taking a look at whether or not there's increased coherence or changes in coherence across the sessions, seeing if there's any reductions or changes in symptomology, and then we'll be also asking overall participant satisfaction, how people felt with the sessions and how they felt after the sessions. And so hopefully this pilot study is designed to work toward future directions of potentially pursuing larger scale grant funding by either the Department of Defense or National Institute of Health, taking a look at viable options for traumatic brain injury neurorehabilitation research. So we may be able to move into National Institute of Health, R21 or R01 grants, and then potentially in the future also being able to investigate combined protocols of integrating this a passive form of neurofeedback with either things like photobiomodulation, hyperbaric oxygen therapy, both the things, like I said, I utilize within my clinical practice and have been very effective. I'm interested to see if there's synergy between those modalities. And along the same line, potentially exploring applications of neurobiomodulation or passive neurofeedback techniques in relation to psychedelic-assisted neurorehabilitation models. There are several ongoing studies in relation to psychedelic-assisted neurorehabilitation right now for traumatic brain injury and stroke recovery. And then the development of translational pathways to bring research findings into clinical practice for broader access to patients with persistent post-TBI symptoms. So we're looking to see whether or not this lends itself as an accessible, low-risk form of neuromodulation for people who are dealing with symptoms of chronic TBI and or PTSD. Being able to build out and refine individual protocols based on neural network activation, and aid in the recovery plateau to more of a regenerative rehabilitation process post-TBI. So really working toward optimization of the nervous system and getting people to be able to be as functional as possible. And then potential more applications to PTSD, veterans and first responders, and neurodegenerative conditions as well. So some of the key takeaways: passive neurobiomodulation seems feasible, personalizable, and potentially promising for TBI recovery. The pilot study will lend itself or give us more information on this feasibility. And then the potential of utilization as an integrative protocol to amplify neuroplastic benefits. Dr. Hicks talked about neuroplasticity and the importance of that, and in regulating and healing the nervous system. And then the next steps, larger scale controlled trials and clinical implication pathways. So that is about what I've got. So acknowledgements to everybody at Helfgott and NUNM, Dr. Goldberg for having me, Dr. Zwicky. I'll give a couple of my research collaborators, Dr. Stefan Kassian and Dr. Rachel Turetsky, were the authors of that PTSD study utilizing this passive neurofeedback, and are also been very helpful consultants in getting this pilot study underway as well. So if you have any questions or want to further support the work, you can reach out directly to me. And that is what I have got for you guys. So
Wonderful.
Thank
you
you
so much. That
very
was
much.
That was very, very interesting. I did not know about this passive biofeedback. That is really, really interesting. I'm used to the more standard, you're staring at a screen. I know what you meant when you said that gamification, and you're meditating. You're trying so hard to meditate and get that balloon to go up. So very good point about TBI and cognitive burden and how challenging that might be. So absolutely interesting. Really excited to see where your research is taking this. There are some questions for you in the chat if you want to try to answer those while we do the next presentation, and then we're going to try to save live questions for the end. We are recording and we will release the recording after as well. So this last piece, let me make sure. Now, if this doesn't come through, please, a colleague, let me know out loud. But otherwise, I'm going to assume that it's going through. So this is from Dr. Sodders, and let me see if we can do this one. I think I'm going to, sorry, give me one technical section here. Okay, and if you can't hear this, someone please let me know.
Hi, I'm Mark Sodders. I am an assistant research investigator at the Helfgott Research Institute. And today I'd like to share with you some insights from a couple of studies I conducted about acupuncture use after a traumatic brain injury. But first, these disclaimers and notices. The content of this presentation is for informational purposes only and does not constitute medical advice. The content of this presentation does not necessarily represent the official views of the National Institutes of Health, the University of Washington, the Harborview Injury Prevention and Research Center, Helfgott Research Institute, or National University of Natural Medicine. Mark Sutters, that's me, has no financial or non-financial conflicts of interest relevant to this presentation to report. Okay, now that is aside, a little about me. I am an acupuncturist and I became involved in research back in 2016. I worked under a couple of grants at the University of Washington in Seattle. Those were funded by the National Center for Complementary Integrative Health. And my research interest was on acupuncture and how acupuncture might help individuals living with a TBI, particularly adults living with chronic TBI. I was interested in other non-pharmacological options as well, but primarily on acupuncture. So what is acupuncture? Well, in short, it's a method of stimulating anatomical areas on the body with thin, flexible needles as a remedy for medical symptoms or conditions. Now, originated in China over 2,000 years ago, 2,000 to 3,000 years ago, and it developed pretty highly in China, largely because of geographical barriers there. But it was used in other parts of the world in this fashion. But within the region we now know as China, like most traditions, the use of acupuncture grew over time and expanded. It's thought that initially it was used for skin conditions, but the indications for using acupuncture expanded to include a host of medical conditions, internal medicine, neurological type conditions, not just skin conditions, and not just pain at that. Now, in the United States, acupuncture use is steadily growing, even though it's still not that common to have. And some research has taken a look at this over the past many years, actually, at this point. One article I'm thinking of right now characterized the average acupuncture user in the United States as being, tends to be older, tends to identify as female, has a college degree or higher, so that includes postgraduate work, and reports a high annual income. And in addition to certain types of medical conditions, maybe a little surprisingly, having a good health status is associated with the average acupuncture user here in the United States, which is kind of indicates that people are using it for health maintenance purposes, not just to address some sort of symptom. Well, long story short, as an acupuncturist, I worked in various types of rehabilitation centers and things like that. And over time, I became interested in TBI to know if this non-pharmacological method could be beneficial in helping individuals with TBI live more independently. So TBI, if I haven't already said it, traumatic brain injury, TBI for short, it is a global public health issue, not just the United States. Research, at least within the United States, shows that almost 3 million people here in the States sustain a TBI annually. But beyond that, approximately 3 to 5 million individuals are living with a TBI-related disability. That's basically 1 to 3% of the entire United States population. Now, common medical conditions individuals experience after an injury include anxiety, depression, cognitive difficulties such as with attention and focus, and issues with sleep and pain. Now, current rehabilitation strategies that we have, they're good, but they are not optimized. There are multiple opportunities for improvement. And what I mean by optimized is that we don't know how much of a therapy generally leads to the most recovery for most people, right? So there's a lot of research still to be had within the world of TBI rehabilitation, and much more so with people in the chronic phases. As the last point underscores the need for more research, TBI can be viewed as a disease state. Why is that? Well, we know that approximately a third of individuals experience a decline in any rehabilitative progress within 10 years after an injury. And so that really highlights this this idea that a traumatic brain injury, a TBI, is not a single time event, and then you do some healing, and then whatever residual issues you have is just kind of what remains with you. That is not the case. This shows this more as a dynamic state where you have something's getting better, something's getting worse, and for a significant portion of people, they really do have a decline over time. So we need to offer more rehabilitation strategies for people, not just with acupuncture, but a host of other things, as long as it's plausible. And that's a good segue to find out, would acupuncture be plausible in a setting of TBI? Well, as we already mentioned, a lot of people have depression, cognitive difficulties, and pain. And we know outside of the context of a traumatic brain injury that acupuncture does improve outcomes related to pain, depression, and cognition. Unfortunately, we don't have a lot of research on outcomes within a TBI population. What we do have, as you briefly saw for a second there, we have some animal studies. We have a lot of animal studies, actually, that demonstrate that acupuncture can decrease inflammation and scarring in the brain and promote healing the brain itself. And all of these, and maybe not in every study that was conducted, but these could be connected with certain types of outcomes that could be measured in a positive way. But within humans, it's a different story. There really isn't a lot in the way of looking at adults or children, for that matter, at least as far as I'm aware, in the chronic stages. At least with an adult, in the chronic TBI population in adults, there's very few studies. Most of the studies deal with acute rehabilitation or while people are still in the hospital. The more chronic stages has to do with these large observational studies where acupuncture is not being used in a prospective manner to prospectively look at its effect on a certain outcome. Instead, it's more like looking at data registries of people who've had it, who've had a TBI, and then track them over, decades or whatever to see is there an association with acupuncture use with hospitalization use, rehospitalization rates, and also other conditions that tend to go with TBI, like an increased risk of stroke over time. So that information's there, but we're nowhere near a place where we could just jump into a clinical trial. All right, so we really need to understand the needs of people in TBI and their views of acupuncture. And this information will help complete the picture of what is most important to address for individuals with TBI and how to approach the study of acupuncture for those identified needs, which leads me to the first study I'd like to review with you. Now, the complete reference to this, so you can get the study yourself, will be at the end of this presentation, as with the second study I'll go over here in a little bit. Now, this first study is about a survey I conducted with a group of investigators at the University of Washington. It was a simple cross-sectional study, which means that people provided their answers at only a single point in time. Okay, we didn't ask how certain views on acupuncture changed over time. We just gave them one questionnaire and they just filled it out at that time. And it was designed to gather information from adults living with TBI to explore, in part, their acupuncture knowledge, attitudes, and beliefs, and identify their health service needs. 136 adults who received care for TBI through the University of Washington healthcare system responded. And this is what we learned. We learned that individuals who had TBI were receptive to acupuncture when considered in combination with the regular conventional therapies and to address ongoing health concerns. Respondents in general had a good general knowledge about acupuncture and positive attitudes. Not surprisingly, individuals with a history of acupuncture use reported a higher level of knowledge and more positive attitudes overall. But all respondents tend to be generally receptive to it. Now, more acupuncture users than non-acupuncture users within this group of respondents said they were more likely to get acupuncture if they had some sort of concerning health condition. And also, and probably most alarming here, is that both groups said that they would be unlikely to stop acupuncture therapy at the recommendation of their healthcare provider, even if they had some positive benefits they were seeing from it. Now, the acupuncture users, that was 62% said they'd be unlikely to stop it, and the non-acupuncture users was still only at 41%. But 41% is almost half, so that's quite a bit. So, I mean, that finding is a little alarming, and I don't condone this, okay? But it is good information to have because it highlights this need for additional research that we need to look at the perspectives of healthcare providers on acupuncture to kind of get an entire picture of that dynamic between healthcare providers and patients. And as you see here on the screen, particularly the acupuncture users, they were likely to still seek its use even if there was not a large evidence base for what they wanted to use it for. Which that's not surprising. People who've had acupuncture, they know what to expect, and they kind of know how they respond to it. And so I can completely imagine someone, wanting to try it if they've had it before, even if there's really not a lot of academic writings about a certain condition they may be wrestling with. Now, it doesn't matter if individuals would receive great benefit from acupuncture, and if healthcare providers recommend it and they're open and accepting to it, if there are issues having it. And so some of the most important information we got from this study were some areas where there's a barrier to its use. All right. The one thing is that that the respondents did not have a high knowledge that multiple acupuncture treatments are needed for most conditions. Now, acupuncture users at 60% of them demonstrated adequate knowledge on this, but like I said with the other one, 40% is almost 50. A large group of individuals did not recognize that you need a lot of treatments. It's not one or two treatments and you're done. And existing research highlights that most chronic pain conditions and other types of conditions require these multiple treatments more than one time a week for many weeks, over a month or two or three. And that is at a much higher rate in utilization of what the average acupuncture users have now, which is generally about once a week, maybe for 8 weeks. So this knowledge needs to be, there's room for education about the use of acupuncture in its proper sense. And this frequency of treatment, actually, it's discussed in old Chinese medicine texts. That rate of treatment is a bit reflected there, even at a higher rate, I might add, in some cases. But that's beyond the scope of this class or this presentation. But this first item as a barrier to its use, to acupuncture's use, particularly in connection with the second one about insurance. Insurance might be a likely barrier to acupuncture. We know that from the research that that's available, that acupuncture users are more likely to have health insurance. But in our study sample, we find that non-acupuncture users, only a third of them said they would pursue acupuncture in the absence of insurance. Now, 60% of acupuncture users said they would still pursue it in the absence of insurance. But still, that is a large proportion of individuals who find insurance a barrier. Now, you combine this with the number of treatments they need. This is a significant prohibitive factor to its use. So, and that's regardless of the acceptability by the patients or the providers, for that matter, as already mentioned. Now, as far as their health service needs, the areas where the respondents mentioned they had issues after the TBI. You see that pain is like the fourth one. It's not the top most mentioned issue. Said it's issue with cognition. It's issue with balance or coordination issues with their senses. So that's things like that's like blurred vision, being bothered by noise, being bothered by light, problems with taste or smell, and things like that. And then finally we get to headache. Now, what's not mentioned on here is pain in other areas, which is a significant issue, and that gets to the second study here in a second. Nevertheless, we see that beyond pain and beyond anxiety and other types of mood disorders, we have all these other areas where there are opportunities to help these individuals who are wrestling with them, usually on a day-to-day basis. Okay, so now let's put this aside for now, and let's transition to the second study I'd like to discuss. And it is an analysis of data that was already collected, existing data. So this was a secondary analysis. And this data, the original data was collected by the TBI model systems. Now, who are the TBI model system? What is that? Well, the TBI model system is basically, it's a network of facilities where individuals who are hospitalized for TBI are approached and asked if they will want to be a part of the study. Of course, they have to meet all the other factors to be included in it. But if those patients say yes, then they're given questionnaires every so often about all sorts of things. Now, one of the questionnaires that was administered fairly recently was on pain, and it was called the pain questionnaire. There you go. It asked about their, but basically it asked about their pain experience, chronic pain that resulted from the TBI and how they managed that. And acupuncture was one of the options they could select. So our study accessed that data, and we reported on the demographic and pain characteristics of patients who use acupuncture for chronic pain after TBI. Now, what's in contrast to the first study, a nice feature of this study is that this included data from individuals across the entire country, nationwide. It wasn't just individuals in the Pacific Northwest. And we know that acupuncture is more accepted in certain parts of the country than it is in others. The West Coast being one of the most accepted areas, or one of the areas with the most acceptance of acupuncture. So it's nice to have data throughout the country. And now there are some drawbacks. Since we did not collect the original data, we were not able to ask important questions, such as acupuncture treatment details, when the acupuncture was received, was it viewed as being helpful, and things like that. But what we did learn is that the average acupuncture user, in most respects, looked like that average user of acupuncture from that other study, with the exception that in our study, most of the individuals identified as being male, and and a large proportion of acupuncture users, almost half, were military service personnel. Now, there are over 1,000 people here, and only 208 reported using acupuncture for chronic pain management. Nevertheless, among those, almost half were military service personnel. And that's not surprising because some of those TBI model systems are connected with the VHA. And we know the VHA has acupuncture as a covered benefit. Now, just having health insurance is associated with acupuncture use. Further research needs to be done to what extent the health insurance is actually being used for it, but just simply having it tends to, you see more people using acupuncture when they have health insurance in general. And we see that here. Now, here's an interesting finding. We find that when the pain questionnaire is completed, most of the people who use acupuncture were 10 years out from their injury. And so this causes you to wonder, was this something where they tried acupuncture in the beginning, or was it something where they kind of did it throughout this period of time? Or was it something they did recently, kind of as a last resort, because existing literature suggests that acupuncture use typically stems from being a last treatment resort for many conditions, at least here in the United States. And so here's another opportunity for research. We also found that even though pain intensity and pain interference was basically the same between the two groups, we did see that people who reported using acupuncture experienced more pain sites. And those pain sites reported here are, you see, are the back, most prevalent, then the legs and feet, then the neck and shoulders, and then the head. All that over a 50% prevalence. Everything else was less than 50% among acupuncture users. Now, for any of you, just like I kind of mentioned before, if you have any education in acupuncture, you might spot the mechanism from an acupuncture perspective. What's going on here is not surprising, but it's interesting to see this play out in real data. But that's beyond the scope of this presentation, so we move on. But just like the survey where we had various areas of concerns, these don't necessarily represent the most problematic areas, just rather how many areas are being reported. So it's still possible that pain in the head is still the most problematic, even though less people reported it than pain in the back. So more opportunities for research there as well. All right, so what's next? What do you do with all this information? Besides the fact that people with TBI are open and receptive and willing to use acupuncture, and many are. Besides that, what do we do with it? Well, there's more to it than just that, obviously. The results in total, highlight the need of examining the use of acupuncture in the context of traumatic brain injury. These results underscore the need for structured research. And we need to understand the acupuncture utility among people with TBI, along with the views of acupuncture by conventional allopathic healthcare providers, all with the goal to facilitate the study of acupuncture in the context of TBI recovery, including the management of ongoing post-TBI symptoms in the case of chronic TBI. And for beyond pain, for areas beyond pain, for the cognition, for balance disorders, for impaired sensory input. So, and of course, not beyond pain, but in addition to pain, I should say. And future work should also focus on what are those specific barriers to having acupuncture after traumatic brain injury through what we would call feasibility trials, which is simply small clinical trials that attempts to assess, will people show up for it? Will they take? Will they receive the needles? Fine. Can they tolerate the needles? Will they complete all the questionnaires and things like that? Because you're not studying the effects of acupuncture on any outcome if you can't people to do the study. So after all these needs assessments occur, then we can look at feasibility trials for those specific needs. And then after that, we can move into the realm of clinical trials to look at specifically to what extent does acupuncture affect certain outcomes. Okay, so that is my presentation. Thank you for your time and hope this was interesting and informative for you. Here are the citations for the two studies that I reviewed with you that you can find online right now. And of course, between these two studies, all the other sources that I used, pretty much all of them, except for about, when did acupuncture begin, and small things like that. All the other sources that was used for this presentation are in some form or fashion in these two studies, and probably in both studies, not just one or the other. But just in case you want to take a look at that list and see if there's something that you might find interesting to look at now, I'll slowly, well, not too slowly, running out of time, we'll go through this. So if you want to stop the video, you can see it. But my preference is you go find the two original studies that we reviewed, and you'll find these references and the specific information to which they were supporting. All right, there you go. And if you have any questions, feel free to contact me. look up my profile on profile page on NUNM's website. And again, thank you for your attention.
Okay, wonderful. So let's open it up for, let me just see here 1 second. All righty. Okay, so very briefly, before going into some questions that we are pending. So thank you again for, hopefully you can see that. Can you guys see that screen? Hopefully, yeah. So thank you again for coming and listening to this presentation. We have profiles. You can do a screen grab, and I'll put these in the copy and paste them into the chat as well. Once the speakers have a chance to answer some questions while they're doing that. But these are the profiles for all the speakers. You can learn more about them and their research.
Hey, Josh, I don't see the
Thank you.
stream.
Thank you. Let's try that again. Okay, hopefully that was working. So thanks again for listening. I'll copy and paste the profiles for the speakers into the chat. If you want to learn more about Helfgott in general, there's a link for the Helfgott Research Institute. We're going to do our next Meet the Scientists of Helfgott in January on a different congregation of topics there. And then if you're interested in helping us fight the good fight and getting some funds together to fund some pilot studies and support these researchers and others at Helfgott further, there's a donate link there as well. So I am now going to get these into the chat, but pass the baton over to our wonderful speakers. It looks like some new questions came in, but let's go ahead. If anyone has any questions, why don't you jump in or raise your hand if you would, and let's see if we can get some of these answered. It looks like Ethel has a question. Ethel, why don't you start us off?
Yeah, good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are in the world. My question is this. I have had a lifetime of 4 TBIs and currently am going through the journey of healing right now from the 4th one. And I was really intrigued by Dr. Wingate. Sorry, I got your name White. I don't know. My brain must have switched it over. But I guess I am a little perplexed as to why neurologists right now only think stroke and spinal cord injuries are the only thing they are aware of treating. And I don't understand why they don't have the insights you guys have, and what are they not reading? Because I feel like when I try to express myself in, clinic or whatever, they look at me like I'm crazy and they're gaslighting. But I just literally heard you guys say some of the things that I'm experiencing. So I would love to know how we can build that bridge, because if I feel like all the care I need is in Portland and I'm over here in Atlanta, where it seems like there's a huge knowledge gap. So maybe that, not too personal, but I just think it's a broader concern because people don't really understand TBI outside of football injuries and blasts from serving in the military. Like there are other non-stroke and spinal cord situations that happen. And I really want to be an advocate for this because I'm living it. And like you said, like the energy it takes to participate in stuff like this and process all this stuff, I'm just wondering how we can get the knowledge gap smaller between, I'm gonna say East Coast and West Coast people, because that's what it sounds like.
Thank you for that. Who wants to take that one or start taking it?
Oh, I can start taking it. No worries on my name. Don't worry about that. And I can't speak for neurologists, and I can't speak for what's going on in the East Coast, and I wouldn't even necessarily make it an East-West thing. I think overall, unfortunately, I think there's a knowledge and education gap sort of across the board on TBI, which Helfgott and UNM is really working to do what we can to help fill that gap on education. So when I'm teaching, often there's not a lot of foundational information out there, and and even within the cultural conversation, as I said, it's become more so over the last decade or so in relation to sports injuries and veterans coming back. But I treat a lot of individuals with those sort of histories, but also a lot of people who just have accidents and falls or other situations that have led to neurotrauma to the brain. It can happen for a lot of different reasons, and I think it's just a matter of us on the research end doing what we can to compile the information so it's a resource for people, and then just advocating that become more of a conversation both culturally and within medical education overall.
Thanks, Doug. Anyone else
great.
want to add to that before we move on to another question?
Yeah,
I think we should start a
add on
podcast.
to that. Oh, sorry, Ethel, go ahead.
No, you're fine. I was just saying, remarking, I think we should start a podcast. But, okay.
Yeah, I mean, just to maybe say a few things about general context too, and this comes up in the conversation often in natural medicine. As naturopathic doctors, we often see people who kind of fall through the cracks of conventional medicine and what gets researched because, funding tends to go toward big conditions with a distinct group with a distinct diagnosis, and TBI is I mean, the initial injury is often a distinct event, but the aftermath of it gets kind of lost often in the long-term effects. And so if you're not, a veteran or a football player, uh, it's like, well, who are we helping? How do we motivate funders to go research a thing if we're not sure, was it really your brain injury or are you just depressed? Or is it really this or is it just something else? So that's a struggle in a lot of conditions, I would say. But there's also a question in the chat about microdosing, which I cut from my slides for time, but I feel like I can never get away with talking about psychedelics without someone asking about microdosing. So here's my take on it. Microdosing is taking a subperceptual dose of a psychedelic. So you don't have a psychedelic experience. You just have a little bit of a psychedelic in your system, and you do this, 2 or 3 times a week for however long. And there's a lot of anecdotal report of a very wide range of benefits. And there's been naturalistic studies. By naturalistic, I mean people just out there doing it and reporting data to some scientists who are collecting questionnaires. And those types of studies are reporting kind of big numbers and big benefits to microdosing. But there have now been a small handful of well placebo-controlled trials of microdosing, and those have all been neutral. They're not unsafe. They're not causing harm, but they're not any better than placebo for whatever reason. And a lot of us are kind of perplexed about why that is. Placebo is perfectly appropriate in microdosing because you're not having a whole psychedelic experience. So placebo should work, but it's not performing better. So microdosing is not for a lot of these health claims. So not sure if we're asking the wrong questions or what's going on there. Theoretically, you would think if there are benefits, and there are clearly benefits to psychedelics for all the things I talked about, the neuroplasticity, they're also anti-inflammatory, have these positive effects on your brain. You'd think small, more frequent exposure to them would have some benefits. But so far, those studies have not found them. And there's also a small theoretical risk because a lot of these substances also engage serotonin 2B receptor, not as strongly as 2A. That's the one that gets a lot of attention, but 2B receptor activation is linked with valvular heart disease. And we know that through other medications that are serotonin 2B receptor agonists do carry that risk. So it's not a big deal if you're doing psychedelic therapy 1, 2, 3, 4 times in your life. But if you're taking, microdosing a psychedelic for years, then that is a valid risk. It's a theoretical one. No one has come in and had this experience yet. but it's a theoretical risk. So microdosing is not necessarily harmless, and the evidence is very mixed right now if there's a benefit. But lots of reports of benefit. They're just on the anecdotal side of that. And there's still not a legal way to microdose. Oregon's system didn't really come up with a good way to do that. So you basically would have to grow your own mushrooms, which has, then you're possessing something that's technically illegal. And, people can do whatever they want, but that's your only way to access them.
Thanks for that, Dr. Hicks. Okay, so in our last few minutes, I know there's some questions in the chat as well, and I wanted to give Dr. Zimmerman a chance to weigh in too. So if you had a question in the chat that hasn't been answered and you'd like to ask it, please go ahead and raise your hand. Ben, I want to turn attention to you for a second. Is there any comment or question that came up for you that you wanted to have a chance to weigh in on at this point in our last few moments together?
I don't know. I mean, there was a specific question about diets and the effect of diets, and I think it's a good and interesting question because we started a conversation in the chat after answering this question, which you can see about. But it's difficult because we're studying populations that already have certain characteristics about them, and I think one thing that I've just taken away from the literature around prevention is that the lifestyle factors that people would benefit most from adjusting in their lives really depends a lot on themselves and their current lives. So for some people, diet really will make a big difference in promoting health and reducing some of these risk factors. For other people, it might be stress. For other people, it might be incorporating some aerobic exercise, things like that. But yeah, I don't know. I didn't see any new comments that needed to be addressed, so I'm happy.
Awesome. Thank you for that as well. And thanks for fleshing that out as well. So I think in lieu of any additional questions, if people do have follow-up questions, so the profile links to all the speakers are posted in the chat. This recording will be put up on the landing page as well within probably a couple days or so. And if you have any feedback for this format, please send us an email back. Just reply to the emails that went out for the reminders. And let us know. This is a new format for us. Again, our next one will be in January. We're still picking out a theme. But I would just want to take a moment to thank all the presenters for a really wonderful presentation, great research, and incredible diligence in the pursuit of science in this space, which is what we're all about here at Helfgott. So thank you, everybody, and thanks for attending. And we will see you in January, if not sooner. Take care.